you talk about the Goldman Sachs investment?
Higher than that.
Higher than 60.
I think the Goldman thing is in the mid-20s. But the important thing is that you need to have people in these jobs. These are complicated, difficult in any times. They're exceptionally difficult, complicated in a kind of crisis like this. And the American people need to have people here who understand and can negotiate effectively, can be the other side of things to make sure we're protecting the financial interest of the American people.
Okay, but key period last September, September 15th, Lehman Brothers is allowed to fail. Lehman, a major competitor of Goldman Sachs. Next day, AIG is bailed out by the government. AIG was on the other side of numerous credit default swaps that Goldman Sachs was involved in. During that week, we now know that Lloyd Blankfein, the head of Goldman Sachs, was on the phone a couple dozen times with Secretary Paulson. He says he was on the phone some with you that same week. Are you surprised that that gives people a sense of inappropriate contact between these institutions?
Alan, like the things we've been through as a country, we still face, have made the American people just deeply angry and frustrated and skeptical about the quality of judgments made by this government. It's a completely understandable thing, and we have been forced to do just extraordinary things, and frankly, offensive things, to help save the economy from the risk of even more catastrophic damage. And that required us, in part because we had so poor tools coming into this, doing things that are going to be deeply unpopular. But we do them not for the benefit of any institution, and I am completely confident that none of those decisions that you refer to had anything to do with the specific interests of any individual firm, much less Goldman Sachs. But if governments in a crisis don't act to help repair a damaged financial system, don't act to provide stability and confidence, don't act to get credit flowing again, then what we face, we learned this through history, the Great Depression, Japan in the 90s, what you'll see is much, much more damage. You'll see hundreds of thousands of businesses fail that should not have failed. People lose their incomes, lose their pension values, lose livelihoods, as you saw in the last part of last year. And the basic imperative, it's a moral imperative, not just an economic imperative, is that in a crisis like this, to protect people who are innocent of the mistakes that brought us to this place, to make sure that they do not suffer from the judgments of others, you have to do things to provide stability and confidence and repair the damage caused by that. And that is the necessary thing to do for the country.
Was the relationship between Goldman Sachs and the various agencies of government in any way inappropriate in your view?
Not in my view, absolutely not. And we should never, ever tolerate anybody in these positions, ever, doing something that would be judged as to benefit individual institutions.
Okay, question 4, again from Zwendkos, 690 digs. You failed to pay some of your federal taxes in 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004. Please explain. You've explained it before. They're asking you to explain again.
I have. You know, it's an understandable thing. I was the president's nominee to be Secretary of the Treasury. You would expect my tax history to be of interest to the American people. It's a completely understandable thing. And one great strength about our system is the people who are asked to do these jobs have to go through an exceptionally careful review of their entire financial, personal, professional history. And a great strength of our system is all that information was put in the public domain. Congress of the United States had the opportunity to go through it over a prolonged period of time, all done and disclosed before I was first nominated. And they had a chance to make a judgment in that. And I think, again, it's understandable that people would be interested in looking at that question.
There was a second questioner who asked about that, who said, giving you the benefit of the doubt that you were neither inept nor corrupt, but were simply overwhelmed by an overly complex tax code, what recommendations do you have for simplifying the tax code?
There are a lot of things that I think we can do to make this tax code more simple, make it easier for people to understand and comply with their obligations. The President's already made some initial headway in that. We're putting in stronger efforts to help enforce the existing laws, collect more taxes, and we'll be making other proposals going forward to do that.
Question 6 from Boss M4N, 520 digs. Last week you requested that Congress raise the $12.1 trillion statutory debt limit, saying that it could be breached as early as mid-October. This is in addition to the increase already approved in February to accommodate the added debt from the $787 billion stimulus plan. How is this anything other than runaway government spending? What will it take for us to see U.S. debt go in the other direction?
This is a very important issue, and it reflects the challenges we're going to be living with for a long time. We came into office with a $1.2 trillion deficit. That deficit was the product of three important things. A judgment by the past administration to undertake very, very expansive tax cuts and a very expensive expansion of Medicare without paying for it. Those decisions themselves added $6 trillion of additional debt to us over the next 10 years. Also decided to not pay for the wars we undertook to protect our national security interests. And we had a deepest recession in generations, and that itself added a substantial check to our existing deficits. And we will not get a recovery in place unless the American people understand that when we get through this, when we fix the damage caused by this crisis, when we get growth back on track, we need to bring those deficits down to a sustainable level. And we are completely committed to do that. And the people around this president were here in office in the 90s when we helped produce, under President Clinton, a period of fiscal responsibility that helped generate one of the best, most broad-based economic expansions led by private investment, strong productivity growth, income gains more broadly shared. And that basic lesson shows how important it is for us to get this country back to where we're living within our means.
Well, clearly people aren't fully convinced of that yet.
Yeah.
There's another question here. This was number 8 on the list. Eric with a not AC, 376 digs. Are you yourself troubled by the massive amount of government spending? What do you think will happen to the dollar over the next 10 years?
Yeah.
Could this provoke a dollar crisis?
Again, this is our basic challenge. Again, we inherited and started in office with a deep financial crisis. To get out of that, we were forced to do exceptional things. Those were necessary things to do. There is no path to getting our deficits down over long term that doesn't start with getting this economy back on track. It's a necessary thing to do. But we have to make sure that people understand, not just Americans, but people around the world understand that we need to return to the point where we're back living within our means. And that will require doing exceptionally difficult things over a sustained period of time. There's no choice for us, though.
Well, my understanding reading the polls is the thing that has really convinced a lot of people or caused a lot of people to raise questions about the degree of your commitment to doing that is the health care bill. You're talking about what was initially at least $1 trillion expense that wasn't driven by the recession, wasn't driven by any of the things that you just mentioned that caused the deficit to rise.
Two really important things to say on that front. The first is that our long-term deficits are mostly driven by the fact that healthcare costs in the United States are growing much more rapidly than the economy as a whole, than inflation. And unless we address that, and that requires comprehensive reform, we're going to face a deeply irresponsible and sustainable fiscal position. So healthcare reform is necessary for us to get these deficits down over time. The President has made it clear that he is not prepared to support healthcare reform unless it is fully paid for. Fully paid for. It does not add a dollar to our national debt. So he's going to do something his predecessors have not done, which is to make sure that a new initiative like this, which is deeply consequential for the country, is going to be done in a way that's fiscally responsible. That means over the next 10 years would not add a dollar to our deficits, and longer term has to bring those costs down. And I think it's a complicated thing to understand, and I think people are understandably concerned about our deficits, but we're concerned too. And that's why the President decided that we need to go on healthcare reform early so we can reduce those costs that are the principal driver of those long-term deficits.
Question 7 from Daniel RH9 with 441 digs. Why is the government only supporting aging and increasingly obsolete car makers? You've given an extraordinary amount of money to General Motors, but the government has failed to encourage new, innovative, and cleaner forms of personal transportation, such as produced by Tesla Motors. Why has TARP money not been invested in companies such as Tesla? I don't know if this fellow is an investor in Tesla, but he makes an interesting point. Should we be investing in companies that are the winners in the industrial contest, not the losers?
He's right, and we are, in the sense, if you look at what is in the Recovery Act, there is, I think, the largest program ever of government support for investment in renewable technologies across the U.S. manufacturing industry, so that we're moving towards a more energy-efficient economy. And we're seeing the largest support this country's ever contemplated for trying to encourage greater investments in more energy-efficient technologies, not just in the automobile industry, but elsewhere. And we're behind much of the rest of the world in terms of quality of innovation in these areas, and we need to fix that.
Secretary Geithner, thank you very much for agreeing to participate in this DIG dialogue.
Happy to do it. Good to see you.
Lies.